Putin's shadow fleet has no safe passage anymore. The routes from the Gulf of Tallinn to the English Channel, from Gibraltar to Suez, are closed, and the Mediterranean has turned into a complete shadow fleet prison during this hunting season. France just shut down Russia's energy route from Gibraltar to Suez on the morning of January 22nd. No warning shots, no diplomatic note of condemnation, direct intervention and seizure. A giant Russian tanker carrying hundreds of thousands of barrels of smuggled oil was trapped in international waters by a dawn raid by French commandos. Just a few days earlier, Italy had also seized a Russian ship hiding under false documents. The Italian police chained a giant Russian ship loaded with metal to the port, cutting off Moscow's export artery. France and Italy, joining forces, closed the Mediterranean to Russian ghost ships. Now there is nowhere to run, no port to hide in. The massive $100 billion energy pipeline that kept Russia's economy afloat is gone, right in the middle of the Mediterranean. The military aspect of the incident signals a fundamental shift in NATO's maritime doctrine. At dawn on January 22nd, what happened off the coast of Gibraltar, the strategic gateway to the Mediterranean, was not a standard Coast Guard check. It was a pre-planned naval restraint operation. The targeted vessel, the MT Grinch, appeared on paper to be an innocuous commercial tanker flying the flag of the Comoros Islands. However, the ship's fate was sealed days before it even entered Gibraltar, when it was picked up on the radar of the British Royal Navy vessel HMS Dagger. British and American signals intelligence, or SIGINT, had recorded, second by second, the digital maneuvers the ship had performed to conceal the true origin of the 850,000 barrels of crude oil it had loaded in Murmansk. The ship believed it had lost its trail by sailing dark, that is, by turning off its AIS transponders. However, for NATO's satellite-based surveillance network, this was equivalent to lighting a lantern in the dark. Helicopters launched from the French Navy and tactical boats approaching from the sea targeted the ship not in the grey areas of international law, but directly with charges of sanctions violation and flying a false flag. The scene that greeted the commandos when they boarded the ship summed up the dire state of the shadow fleet: neglected equipment, panicked Russian and foreign crew members, and most importantly, a sack full of fake documents used to conceal the ship's true identity.
Okay, French Navy.
850,000 barrels of oil. This amount equates to approximately $65 million in cash at market value. It was certain that Putin would use this money to finance missiles and drones for the Ukrainian front. However, that money is not currently in the Kremlin's coffers. It is in the impound warehouses of Marseille port in France. Perhaps it was a twist of fate that the ship was named M/T Grinch, because with this operation, France stole not Russia's Christmas, but its future. This intervention destroyed the Shadow Fleet's armor of immunity. While France held the Western Gate, Italy had carried out a much more technical and sophisticated operation in the Adriatic Sea just 1 week earlier. The Italian financial police, with their raid on the Tuvalu-flagged cargo ship Hızır Reis in the port of Brindisi, exposed a little-known but critical front of the war: the metal wars. For Russia, metal exports are as vital a source of income as oil. Steel, iron, aluminum. These are both sources of income and cards Russia holds in the global supply chain. However, by stopping this ship, Italy exposed Russia's civilian trade mask. The technical details of the operation proved Russia's helplessness. When the Italian cybercrime unit boarded the ship, their first task was to seize the ship's voyage data recorder and electronic chart display and information system. Russian captains had attempted to make the ship appear to be elsewhere by turning off their AIS devices or sending false position data. However, ECDIS systems record the ship's physical movements, depth data, and radar echoes. When Italian experts examined this data, they determined from digital fingerprints that the ship was in Russia's Novorossiysk port between November 13th and 16th, 2025, loaded prohibited cargo, and then concealed its route by falsifying documents. This is a dagger plunged into the heart of Russia's shadow fleet strategy, because Russia believed that tracking these ships was impossible. Italy, however, showed the world. Even if you turn off the GPS, we know where you are from the ship's engine vibrations, satellite images, and digital traces. The seizure of 33,000 tons of metal cargo is a halted stamp on Russia's annual $40 billion metal exports. Now visualize the strategic map in your mind. Where is Russia's lifeline for maritime trade? The Bosphorus Strait is a passage for ships leaving the Black Sea, but the real exit is the Mediterranean. There are two gates to open up to the oceans from the Mediterranean: Gibraltar in the west and Suez in the east. This coordinated move by France and Italy is not a coincidence. It is the declaration of a 3,000-kilometer invisible wall that NATO has woven across the Mediterranean. France, in cooperation with Spain, has locked the Western Gate. Italy has blocked the central Mediterranean by holding the Sicilian and Adriatic channels. In the eastern Mediterranean, the presence of Greece and the US in Crete is narrowing the room for maneuver for Russian ships. 65% of Russian oil must use this corridor to reach Asian markets. So, is there an alternative? The Baltic Sea has already become a NATO lake. The Northern Sea route is only partially open during the summer months and is logistically inadequate. The only remaining option is for ships to circumnavigate the African continent. However, this extends the journey by 15 to 20 days, doubles fuel costs, and increases the risk of those rusty shadow tankers being caught in ocean storms. The Macron and Meloni governments have effectively declared the Mediterranean a no-go zone for Russian ships. This strategy aims to geographically strangle Russia. Russian ships no longer trade when they enter the Mediterranean. They proceed like walking through a minefield, fearing at any moment which naval vessel will stop them. This situation creates complete chaos and strangulation in Russian logistics. This blockade in the Mediterranean is not an isolated incident. It is the southern leg of a massive pincer operation encompassing the northern hemisphere. Looking at the bigger picture, we see that France is applying the same aggressive doctrine not only in the Mediterranean, but also in the Baltic and North Seas. Since September 2025, the French and British navies have been relentlessly targeting Russian ships passing through the English Channel. Recall that last October's raid on the tanker Boracay off the coast of the English Channel was the first signal of this new era. A test was conducted that day. Today, full implementation is in effect. In the north, energy shipments from Russia's Primorsk and Ust-Luga ports are hitting the Baltic Wall, formed by Estonia, Finland, and Denmark. With Sweden and Finland joining NATO, the Baltic Sea has ceased to be an exit route for Russia and has turned into a surveillance tunnel. Germany turning back a suspicious tanker in its territorial waters last week, the UK imposing direct sanctions on 544 ships, rendering them unseaworthy, and the US's Marinera operation in the Atlantic, all serve a single purpose: to collapse Russia's maritime trade on a global scale. Russia is surrounded by icy waters to the north, NATO fleets to the west, and the Mediterranean lock to the south. The economic cost of this naval blockade is far beyond sustainable limits for Russia. Russia's energy exports, such as oil, gas, and derivatives, generate between $90 and $100 billion in annual revenue. This money is the backbone of the Kremlin's federal budget. It funds the daily cost of the war, soldiers' salaries, the defense industry, and social assistance. Every time a ship is stopped in the Mediterranean, the risk cost of transporting Russian oil instantly rises in the market. Insurance companies refuse to cover Russian ships. An uninsured ship means it cannot dock at any reputable port. Those who can find insurance are forced to pay exorbitant premiums of up to 50%. This increased cost directly reduces Russia's profit margin. Worse still, Russia's customers, especially China and India, are turning this situation into a bargaining chip. Buyers who say, "Your ships are risky, they could be seized, your oil may not reach me," are demanding an extra discount of $15 to $20 per barrel from Russia. As a result, even if world prices rise, Russian oil brings Putin revenue at a loss-making level. This loss of revenue is creating a seismic effect on Russia's home front. Foreign exchange reserves to be spent to maintain the value of the ruble are dwindling. Inflation is being fueled. Putin is forced into an impossible choice between financing the war and protecting the welfare of his people. Those tankers stopped in the Mediterranean are, in fact, the very essence of economic stability in Moscow. Perhaps the most crucial point of the crisis is the new strategy put forward by Ukrainian President Zelensky and now being implemented by the West: seize and sell. Zelensky welcomed Operation Grinch with a very critical statement. Seizing the ships is not enough. Wouldn't it be fair to seize and sell the oil carried by these tankers and give the proceeds to Ukraine? Lawyers are currently laying the groundwork for this. If France and Italy auction off the 850,000 barrels of oil and 33,000 tons of metal they seized and transfer the proceeds to the Ukraine Reconstruction Fund or to arms purchases, it would be the greatest strategic irony in history. Putin's oil will be sold and returned to the Ukrainian army as bullets and drones. This situation is the pinnacle of the concept of maritime law wars. The success of this model has thrown not only Russia, but also Iran and Venezuela, which use similar methods, into a state of panic. The strategy of shooting, seizing, and selling suspicious ships approaching Western ports is no longer just a theory. It is a reality operating in the Mediterranean. So what was the Kremlin's response to this situation? Helplessness and ineffectiveness. The Russian Foreign Ministry accused France of piracy and threatened the most severe consequences. However, on the ground, there is nothing the Russian Navy can do in the Mediterranean, which has become a NATO lake. The threats bounce off the iron will of France and Italy and vanish. What is happening is not a simple police case or customs smuggling operation. This is the wiped out of Russia's claim to be an energy superpower in the 21st century. Energy was Putin's greatest geopolitical weapon. For years, he threatened Europe by saying, "I'll turn off the taps." Now, Europe has checkmated Putin by saying, "I'll tie up your ships." Russia has fallen into a strategic trap. A Russia that cannot sell its energy cannot feed its army. A Russia that cannot feed its army cannot hold on to the territories it has occupied. The blockade in the Mediterranean means that Russian soldiers on the front line are running out of ammunition and cannot refuel their tanks. The coalition of France, Italy, the UK, and the US has isolated Russia from global maritime trade, reducing it to the status of North Korea or Iran. However, Russia's economy and population are not structured to withstand such extensive isolation. This is the total collapse of the system. Until that moment, the Kremlin viewed Western sanctions as merely bureaucratic obstacles on paper. But on the morning of January 22nd, in the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean, they found not papers, but steel armor and barrels. Those ships chained up in Marseille and Brindisi are not just piles of metal. They are monuments to the sinking of Russia's imperial arrogance, its "rules don't apply to us" mentality. That massive $100 billion energy pipeline has been shut down, never to be reopened. Zelensky's vision is now the reality on the ground. Russia's own natural resources are turning into weapons that spell its own demise. The seas are over for Putin, the oceans are closed, and the Mediterranean has gone down in history as the graveyard of the shadow fleet.